Oh, yeah.
How's that work?
What could you... Mine is mutual.
Really?
Very good. Trying all the wires.
Be almost back to full strength, huh? Right.
All right.
Turn it off, like that, like that.
You do a little low on it. Did you know Church of Brethren yet?
Huh?
You just subbed out there, or you were?
I've been out there, I'm going to be there in a couple of weeks.
Is Lovell still?
Yeah,
He kind of their main minister?
Yeah.
Brett?
I'll be there.
Blow both ends. Blow
Okay.
both.
I should there.
You blow it.
And then after, we stay around the building. Angie, you have it turned off.
I know.
What did I do wrong? Get that rat in your mouth tonight.
That's true. Council gone wild.
All right, it
I
is
can just see that on
4:30.
his Twitter page.
I'd like to begin.
Council's going nuts for the microphone.
How you been?
Are we live?
Good business?
So I'd ask that you join me. We'll stand for a moment of silence, and we'll follow that with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let's begin with a roll call, please.
Tom Eggers,
Here.
Wayne Barahona,
Here.
Pete Hamill,
Here.
Ken Snyder,
Here.
Brad Hand.
Here.
All right. Next item up is approval of the agenda. Take a motion for that.
So moved?
Support.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Hamill,
Aye.
Eggers,
Aye.
Barahona,
Aye.
Ken,
Aye.
Snyder.
Aye.
All right, we now move into the public forum section of our meeting. Is there anyone here wishing to address the council at this time? I recognize everybody here, and I don't think they will, so we're going to assume not. Moving forward to the consent agenda, I'll take a motion to approve that, please.
So moved.
Support.
Any discussion there? Roll call, please.
Snyder,
Aye.
Eggers,
Aye.
Ken,
Aye.
Barahona,
Aye.
Hamill.
Aye.
Okay, moving on then to our first item under new business, a resolution approving the zoning administration and code enforcement agreement with Planning Solutions LLC. Steve Holgren, you remember, was with us 2 weeks ago, explained his services. We'll take a motion to get that on the floor. Motion to approve.
So moved. Support.
Any discussion?
I have a question about it. What codes and nuisances are we going to enforce? What's our priority to have him enforced?
Sam, we'll defer to you on that.
Do we have a list of...
I have a list, I don't have it.
Okay.
I don't have it with me, but it was, be the nuisance chapter of the code. It would be dangerous buildings. It would be zoning violations, such as parking a car on a lawn, that type of thing. Could also be violations of the tree chapter. If, for example, you have a dead tree on your yard, not between the sidewalk and the street, but on your yard. But that could be something that could be enforced too.
Okay, thank you.
How we handle that? How have we been handling that up to this point then? What makes it necessary that we add this, I guess?
Well, currently, it's triage, and we are handling the worst. You know, we're just handling it as best we can. We're not able to be as proactive as I was a few years ago, simply because the volume is so great, and there's so many other things, so many other tasks to do.
And Ken, just so you know, it's Sam alone has been doing all of that, so this is him
Yeah.
attempting to delegate some of that stuff to an outside party, freeing him up to do slightly more important things than dealing with dead logs and what
Yeah.
have you.
Now, would they have the authority to follow through, or do they have to come to you?
Todd and I will still be signing off we'll be still involved in still be aware of what's going on.
Okay.
But he'll be more involved in the zoning side, and I'll be more involved on the code enforcement side. So we've achieved a lot of voluntary compliance, Ken. We've had people, for the most part, have been very cooperative, but we've had some, I don't want to single anybody out on the microphone here, but we've had, there's one street, for example, where every single car has been removed from the lawn. At one point, there was maybe 10 or 12. There's now one, and it's a commercial van, and they refuse to move it. And I'm too busy it's not parked between the sidewalk and the street, so it's not in the right-of-way, but it's just parked on the lawn, and that has to go through the nuisance process. We're going to tow it. So if they're watching this meeting, hopefully they'll finally move their van. But it isn't fair to all the other 10 or 11 people on that street that followed my phone call or my letter and immediately moved their car. And you have somebody who has a business in town that has a commercial van parked on their lawn. And that's the type of issue that we're going to have Steve helping us with.
Okay. So they would have the authority to call the towing company or whatever.
Well, it'd have to follow the nuisance process. You have to do a certified letter, or have a police officer or somebody deliver
Okay.
a letter.
Yeah. Okay.
Give a few days. There's a process for each type of issue.
That's good.
That answers
That
your
answers
question.
my question 100%.
So if I was to put that into context, Sam and Todd, the way I understand this is that this third party will be doing the due diligence on, per your guys' guidance and direction, and per your priority, I guess. So you guys will select which ones they'll be doing, which ones they won't, that type of thing. I know this is a whole new deal, and I just wanted to try to put it into perspective so everyone understands how that's gonna play out. So, sorry I'm not as clear about what I'm trying to say, but I believe that you guys are gonna make the decision on which issues they work on. They'll do the due diligence on it, you'll sign off on it, and that's how it'll work.
Yeah, we will still be accountable for what's taking place, and
Right.
this is an experiment. It's less of an experiment than the experiment that had been approved on at budget time, which was to have a half-time or a full-time employee that would be split between this and the ambulance service.
Right.
And so I think this will work out, but if it doesn't, we have an easy out.
Okay, thanks.
On that topic, if in 6 months it's not working out, I'd look for a clause or something about breaking of the contract. Are we tied in for 12 months, or if it's 6 months, this isn't what we expected, we can we can withdraw without penalty, so to speak.
Yeah, Mayor, I will address that for you. And if you look under section 10, that's a key provision to this contract, and that is that either party, upon proper written notice, can cancel the agreement with a 90-day window, okay? And you would have to, as the city, pay up to the termination date, but you wouldn't have to pay beyond the termination date. Does that make sense?
So, Mike, are you saying it's 90 days minimum or a window of 0 to 90 days?
It's a 90 days minimum.
Okay.
So we say in 6 months, this is not working out, it would be 3 more months before the contract is, I mean, we would pay for 3 more months then?
Yes, unless the parties could mutually agree to an earlier termination date.
Okay.
It's important for both the council and the public to know that Mr. Koiker retains his position as zoning administrator, that Mr. Yule retains his position as assistant zoning administrator, and therefore they still have the authority and the responsibilities that lie with those positions. Likewise, the city council is entitled to reports from Mr. Holgren and his company as they deem appropriate. Now, typically Sam or Todd would make that call if and when they want reports, but there is a reporting requirement. And it's also important to realize that while nuisance abatement is a key component of this agreement, it's much broader. It's basically administrative assistance, professional assistance with all aspects of zoning code and, to Sam's point, portions of the city code and, for instance, the subdivision regulations. So permitting processes and the paperwork that goes with that, preparing notices, and there's a laundry list in both the agreement and the the attachment, which outlines the scope of services.
When Steve was with us 2 weeks ago, and also in his list of qualifications, he talks about grant writing and how much I think for the city of Sibley, he's gotten $1 million. That is not part of this contract at this time, as I understand it.
There is a provision that relates to grant writing.
But it would be an extra charge.
He says he can provide additional grant writing. If he's hired to do that, he has a proposed fee that would go along with that. And that is on the proposed scope of services, section 8, under Roman numeral 1. But just because it's there doesn't mean he has to do every one. It would be an agreement between the city and him on a particular grant, and if agreed, then this would be the fee.
Any other questions? Sibley has used his service for 2 years. Did you mention or talk to the city administrator there? Were they pleased with his service?
They are.
So. All right, if there are no more questions, then we have a motion and support, correct? Then we need to vote on this. So we'll call for the question.
Hamel.
Aye.
Hint.
Aye.
Eggers.
Aye.
Farahona.
Aye.
Snyder.
Aye.
All right, moving on then to item B, under new business, the resolution approving the purchase of real estate owned by Mark and Karen Wagner. Anything you would like to add at this point, Sam?
No, I'll stand for questions.
Okay. In order to follow, we should first of all, have a motion to approve the resolution.
So moved.
And do we have support for that?
Support.
Okay. Any questions or discussion? Hearing none, we'll call for the question.
Snyder.
Aye.
Hint.
Aye.
Hamel.
Aye.
Farahona.
Aye.
Eggers.
Aye.
All right. Next item, under 7A, is to open the public hearing on the authorization of a loan agreement and the issuance of notes.
Do we need to take action on this item?
On the purchase
Oh,
agreement?
yes, you're right. Yep, let's back up a minute. 6B, item 2. A resolution authorizing advancement of costs relating again to this property purchase. Take a motion to approve that as well.
So move.
Support.
Further discussion? Roll call, please.
Hint.
Aye.
Hamel.
Aye.
Eggers.
Aye.
Snyder.
Aye.
Farahona.
Aye.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, now moving on to item 7A, we'll open the public hearing on the authorization of a loan agreement and the issuance of the notes. Doesn't make sense. The notes to evidence the obligation of the city thereunder. No one here looking to make public comments? Have we received any
None.
written or oral
No.
in city offices? Then I'll take a motion to close the public, yes, Sam?
We could have Scott talk about this.
Before we close
Yeah,
the public hearing?
During the hearing is fine.
Okay. Scott, if you want to step forward and just,
Yeah, sure. So, Scott Stevenson with D.A. Davidson just came up this afternoon to give you kind of an overview of maybe what's changed in the interest rate markets in the last 30 days since I was up here about a month ago, and answer any questions you have from a procedural standpoint in terms of what's going on and kind of where we go from here as well. So, quickly on interest rates, when I was here in June, I had run a preliminary amortization based on what we talked about in terms of what a good structure looked like for the city's cash flows, and I think we were coming up with around a 3.5% type interest rate at that time. Rates are actually down a little bit since then, which probably surprises most of you. You know, you watch the news and you hear about the Federal Reserve raising interest rates, and that's true, that's happened, but you know, markets are pretty efficient and they're pretty forward-looking, so a lot of that has already been priced into the market. And I would even say that later this month, July 27th, I believe, the Fed meets again, and it's expected they'll raise interest rates at least 0.75% at that time. You got to keep in mind that interest rate they talk about when they talk about raising rates is literally the overnight borrowing rates for banks so they can borrow amongst each other. You're talking about borrowing over 10, 11, 12 years on a fixed rate basis, so an overnight rate doesn't exactly comport to the interest rate that you would be paying on the debt that you intend to issue. So it's easy to conflate the two. I guess I would tell you, you don't need to do that necessarily. Long-term rates have come down a little bit. I think an expectation that we're either in a recession or going to be in a recession in the near future is sort of what's holding longer-term interest rates steady or a little bit lower. As that economic data comes out over time, those expectations may change, and that will impact interest rates, but as will, you know, Fed action. So those certainly does have some impact, but it's not the only thing. So I guess that's what I'm trying to convey to you is there will be a variety of factors that will impact interest rates. It's going to change again before we're in a position where you're ready to lock in rates, but the good news is in the last 30 days or so, municipal bond rates have come down a little bit and stabilized for the time being. So where we go from here, I don't necessarily have a crystal ball to tell you that, but at least I'm here with some good news for the time being.
you said we won't be in a position at what is typically the time frame where we would be in a position. If we prove this today,
Oh, yeah, great question. So procedurally, you're right. We could move forward to lock in interest rates as soon as like your next council meeting if you had all your ducks in a row in terms of wanting to actually lock in the financing and borrow money. My understanding is you've got a few hurdles or sign-offs you need as it relates to the water tower, and I don't want to get into that too much because I'm no expert on the topic, but I'll let your staff elaborate on that to the extent you'd like. We're kind of in a standby mode at the moment. The offering document is more or less ready to go. We would need to procure a credit rating. That maybe takes a couple weeks, but yeah, within a couple weeks or 3-4 weeks, certainly from now at the most, if you had all the sign-ups and said, yeah, we're ready to move forward to lock in the financing, we could do that. So the hearing, to your point, does give you authority to move forward with borrowing the money at any time. That could be soon, it could be later, doesn't matter. You now have the luxury of deciding when you want to do that at any time. And we're more or less in a position where we can move forward relatively quickly as well. Just need guidance from you and staff. to let us know when you're ready to do that.
Okay. Any other questions for Steve?
What is the interest rate right now?
That's why I updated it with, you know, the amortization we're talking about, which is a little bit front-loaded, and I came up with about a 3.2% kind of interest rate.
Versus 3.5 you originally
Yeah, that's right.
had presented?
Correct.
Okay.
Mhm. You know, and those rates are based on, I just underwrote an issue a week ago for Sergeant Bluff, which is
Right.
down the way, similar credit rating. They had a little longer amortization, but very comparable type issue, $3.5 million. So same kind of size.
And Sam, how are our ducks looking? Well, you said we needed to have our ducks in a row before we moved forward to lock in a rate. Are we looking at, or are we not at that point yet? Or is there more due diligence and things like that that needs to be done before we proceed to that part, or?
Anything to add?
Yeah, I'll go. So DNR permit was mailed in today. They've signed off on the specification, so that part is pretty well buttoned up. Just waiting for final they have a public comment period that goes till August 3, and I've asked for an outlook of, you know, what's that mean? Does it mean a flashy light, or does it mean you're going to approve or not approve? And the answer I've gotten back is it's too early. So I've been told by the aviation people that we just need to hold the course and let the public comment period expire, and then we'll likely get more information. So August 3 is the end of the public.
So it really all hinges on that.
Well, I think it would be risky not knowing their final answer to go ahead and borrow the money.
That's the big duck
So-
waiting to get in line.
So the risk is not knowing what the extra costs might be involved with meeting those regulations, or is it as much as having to relocate the position?
No, I don't. No.
Okay.
Essentially at the height we are right now, they're telling me that we would have to, the entry to the airport could have to change by like 60 feet. But in talking with the FBO, I forget the acronym, the LNAV or whatever, that they're telling us we have to restrict, is not something that's even highly used on today's planes. So he has no concerns. Now, because we're in that restricted airspace, if it's the addition of a light, big deal, we'll have to light.
Right.
But I can't guarantee you at this point that it's not going to be something. I guess until I hear that out of their mouth, I would hate to borrow money, especially if interest rates are holding steady or maybe reducing. Until we get concurrence from them. I don't think there's a move scenario, Tom. I don't think there is.
Okay.
And there's no lower scenario either, right? That height is determined. Building that tower any lower than our proposed elevation would just make portions of our existing tower unuseful and reduce pressure throughout.
Right.
So that's a no.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Sam, you and I were talking before the meeting how this ties into our next item of business. Could you just reiterate that for the council, please?
So part of the $3.5 million would be spent on Western Avenue. So we're getting authority to be able to spend some money on, I think it was 100,000 or so on design. And so Ehlers Cooney, our bond counsel, had recommended that we proceed with the hearing on the $2.4 million in notes now, so that we're authorized, even though we don't intend to seek that financing for another 2 years. Did I say that right?
Yeah, I think that's effectively the case. I mean, kind of have to separate public hearings from actually borrowing money in this case, right? So a public hearing gives you authority to borrow money, gives you authority to spend the money that you have borrowed on the projects designated within the hearing, which is really what you're trying to accomplish here. It's not saying you're going to borrow another $2.4 million for Western Avenue right now, but it's saying you could spend up to that much of the $3.5 million you intend to borrow on that designated project. So it's giving you some flexibility.
Gives us the authority to act when we need to.
Act and or spend some of the dollars you do borrow now on engineering or construction, should that be the case. Maybe your bids will come in way below expectation on the water tower and you have excess funds, you can apply it towards that project then. That's the idea. Yeah, I'm an optimist.
So, just want to make sure you understand the relationship between the two there. Only the 3.5 is going to be borrowed initially. Anyone else? If not, then we first have to have a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Support.
Roll call, please.
Farahona?
Aye.
Hamel?
Aye.
Hand?
Aye.
Snyder?
Aye.
Eggers?
Aye.
And then the second part of this is approving a resolution instituting proceedings to take additional action.
So move.
Support.
Discussion? Roll call, please.
Snyder?
Aye.
Hand?
Aye.
Hamel?
Aye.
Farahona?
Aye.
Eggers?
Aye.
All right, moving forward then, we'd like to open the public hearing on the authorization of a loan agreement and the issuance of notes to evidence the obligation of the city thereunder. Take a motion for that, please. No, take it back. We don't need a motion for that. The public hearing is open. Any comments? No written or oral comments to the city offices at all regarding this?
No.
Okay,
I would like to motion that we thereunder close the public hearing.
Where it is right now.
Support.
okay, roll call, please.
Hand?
Aye.
Farahona?
Aye.
Snyder?
Aye.
Hamel?
Aye.
Eggers?
Aye.
And then another motion then to approve the resolution instituting proceedings to take additional action. Same song, second verse.
Make the motion to approve.
Support.
Discussion. Roll call, please.
Hamel?
Aye.
Hand?
Aye.
Snyder?
Aye.
Eggers?
Aye.
Farahona?
Aye.
All right. Moving forward into our reports. Sam, is there anything you'd like to share today?
No, not under this section.
Okay. Then move down to Todd. Anything else from you?
No, thank you.
Lots of activity going on downtown today, and both crazy shoppers and street people.
Yeah, lots of construction going on.
Yep.
Thankfully not the same type of crazy as Friday.
Yeah. Right. So, okay, Kurt, anything from you today?
No, thank you, Mayor.
All right. Moving on then, Scott's not here. Ange, anything from you?
No, thanks.
Micah?
No, thank you.
Council to my left.
I have one thing. I've had a few people make comments about all these companies coming in and doing underground utilities, whether they're running fiber for the cable company or gas lines for Mid-America or electrical lines, coming in, tearing up people's yards and leaving clumps of dirt and never coming back and straightening it out, leveling the dirt back off, planting grass. These dirt piles turn into weed piles. So the companies that are hiring these people to do it, I think you need to come back and treat the people well and take care of what you destroyed. My neighborhood, there's dirt clobs all over the place in people's backyards. I'm not impressed, and then when you see the work that's been done over the years downtown, they'll come in and tear out our nice sidewalk and they just throw a piece of concrete down. So I said I would make a comment at the council meeting about the underground utilities and people working for Mid-America and Premier. Put it back the way you found it.
Hi, Mike.
Yes.
So, I'd like to respond to that because I think you brought up a great point. So we did have some issues recently. We had someone down on 9th or 10th Avenue that tripped over a drop in their backyard, a cable internet drop, and it had been there for months, and they reached out to me, and it was gone within a day. But if you see that, let me know.
Okay.
We'll follow up. You know, it doesn't help so much in backyards, but there are communities that have right-of-way permits where you need a permit to expand a driveway between the sidewalk and the street, to dig between the sidewalk and the street, to plant a tree between the sidewalk and the street, which is another process to manage. But it is a process that I have seen work in my prior community. And if we could circle back to fireworks and trees too.
Okay. As soon as I finish with
Yeah.
reports. Yeah, I would concur with Brad too. If we can pass that along to the primary contractors to keep a little closer eye on their subs, but yeah, put it back the way you found it, as Brad says.
Yeah.
Anyone else on my left?
Are we going to talk about fireworks?
We will come to that as soon as we finish these comments.
I had a sinkhole in mine after they finished. I filled it in, but I had a pretty good low sinkhole.
Yeah. Need anything from you? No. Counsel to my right.
Yeah, I was just wondering what's the status on the garbage contract? Have we got everyone signed?
Yes. Thanks
Good.
for mentioning that.
Very
Yes.
good, thank you.
They're both signed.
Great.
That's all I have.
Okay. Wayne?
Just wanted to comment on one of the consent agenda items, the retirement of Sergeant Todd Wood. We accepted today with great consternation, only because he'll be missed sorely. So I just wanted to, we'll talk more about it because he has given us ample notice and we do appreciate that, but I just wanted to comment on what an asset he's been for our city, and his leadership and his tenure will certainly be missed.
Great, thank you for that. I have no further comments, so then I would like to move into our discussions regarding, first of all, what do you want to do hit first? Fireworks?
Fireworks.
Fireworks it is. So,
Is, you sure you don't want to stay? All right.
Chicken.
Something more volatile than interest rates.
so by way of introduction, Sam, I'll let you have the mic.
All right, so this is an explosive issue, and so we're going to, I worked up some comparisons for you. It was real easy thanks to the research that KAWA and Iowa Information had done, and also I found a link from one of the TV stations in Sioux City that did some comparison there. So I've been seeing, I forwarded you a few of the emails, but Sioux Center, Orange City, Cherokee, everybody's wrestling with this right now. There was a lot of complaints this year all over northwest Iowa. I thought part of it this year was, you know, last year it didn't seem like we had as many complaints because, you know, last year I asked the vendors if they would put a copy of our flyer, which is attached in every bag. I forgot to do that this year, but we also did just as much advertising, if not more, than last year on radio and Iowa Information, and there's just a lot of 11 o'clock, 11:15, midnight fireworks. You know, I'm just recently became aware of a family from the Sheldon area who now live in Brandon, and their home burned to the ground on 4th of July because of a fireworks landing on their roof. I don't know that we necessarily want the pendulum to swing to all the way back the other direction, but it's something that we should probably take a look at. Other communities are dialing it back. I'll just open the floor for discussion.
Speaking of fires, Brad, I guess my question, were there any fire calls related to fireworks being shot off
No,
that you're aware of? Okay.
nope,
Not this year,
not this year.
okay?
Were there any tickets or issuances from law enforcement in regards to individuals breaking the ordinance this year?
I could find out for you.
Yeah, I'd like to know how our enforcement matched the complaints, and I'd like to know once just how we dealt with that enforcement on those that were issued or levied. I guess I'm looking for something beyond, something to measure this a little more that's beyond just personal opinion and hearsay. So,
What is the penalty for violating the restrictions that we have now?
$250.
A fine of $250? I would be interested to, that's a good point, Tom, to know how many, if any, were issued. To me, that would be a deterrent if people, I mean, there may be a couple that are made an example of up front, but I guess that,
it's
that
definitely
would be a
standard
way to-
policy, and we need to know
Yeah.
how we're dealing with it.
you know, if they know that it's a policy that is enforced and the fine is stiff, I
Right.
think that compliance would fall in line as after that then.
Yeah.
Looking through the enclosed list, it looks like, let's say roughly half of the towns listed are only allowing fireworks within the first several days of July, as opposed to ours is what, June 15?
June 20.
June 20, yep.
The only problem I have with looking at it from that perspective is that they can still defy the ordinances for 5 days instead of 10 days. And it's still going to be a nuisance, and people will complain for those 5 days just as much as they complain for the 10 days. So, I'm not sure it's a deterrent as much as enforcement is. That's why I'd like to understand the enforcement side of it.
Most complaints I got is because they went way past the time, you know. People have to get up at 4:30, 4 o'clock, and their neighbors are shooting off, they could care less.
Right.
They're shooting up fireworks 11:30, 12.
Yeah.
That's,
I'm not trying to diminish the complaints,
No.
but I think that if we're going to manage the issue to reduce complaints, that we know how we're going to do that.
right.
And by restricting the time frame, I'm not sure you're going to really restrict complaints, because if
You mean
we're,
the
if
day
we're not
timeframe.
enforcing to the ordinance to begin with, they'll shoot them off at 11 o'clock for 5 days, like I said, versus
Right.
10 days, so. But I understand why people are complaining. I'm not diminishing that. But as a councilman trying to deal with the issue, I'm trying to find the foundation to deal with it that's beyond. So,
I think the enforcement, like Greg was talking about, strict enforcement and make an example.
Well, the enforcement, though, is problematic. I mean, if you're not standing there when somebody lights
Yeah.
it off, you can't come in 10 minutes later.
I know.
The enforcement is difficult.
right.
I mean, you can't show, if somebody calls and you show up 20 minutes later, then it's he said, she said, it's, you know, there's no, unless somebody's willing to testify and you make a
Yeah.
major deal out of it.
I'd be willing to bet that the enforcement, the actual, I shouldn't say enforcement, but as far as citation numbers are probably pretty low for that specific reason, that it's
Right.
Such a, you know, it's something that can be, you know, you set it off in the middle of a city base, and yeah, it could look like it could come from anywhere. I mean, granted, the neighbors are closest to the explosions will have something to say, especially on the lower line fireworks, but then it's getting to prove it. And, you know, I'm sure the cops have better things that they could or should be doing other than chasing down fireworks.
Is it better to chase down fireworks or drunk driver or speeding driver? Which is, choose your poison.
Right?
If I might. And it's also a challenge when you hear it to decide whether you should call it in or not. You know, do you call 911 and say, this isn't an emergency, I just want to report fireworks, and you know you only have 2 police officers on duty and there's fireworks going all over town,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
If we make the fine, this may be off, that's all right, I ramble sometimes. But if you make the fine large enough and shorten the time period, would it pay to, you know, for the shorter time to have an extra officer or something? Would the fines cover that extra cost?
Whether it would or would not would probably not be the point. It would be taxing an officer who, on a staff that's already short. That I would find it hard to believe that any officer would be willing to forego one of their precious days off to be the fireworks police.
Yeah.
So what's your answer?
Are you volunteering, Ken?
Give me a badge.
Careful what you wish for.
How about we, if it's all right, Mayor, how about we get some information together for you on the enforcement end of things? Chief wasn't able to make it to the meeting today.
Mhm.
So how about I do that and bring it back?
That sounds good.
You know, when it comes to hunters and fishermen in violation of the standards that are there, whether it's bag limits or catch limits, whatever, they have a hotline, turn in poachers. Maybe we have to have a TIF hotline, turn in fireworks violators. Another TIF acronym to deal with. But, no, I'm kidding, but I think if the enforcement to me is going to be the deterrent, and it is difficult, we realize that, but I think to find the middle ground, we need to show an effort. And a couple of tickets at $500 to $1,000, maybe raise the whatever, but make it a deterrent that people realize we're serious about this. Have your fun, but do it within the guidelines we've established. That to me seemed, if we're going to have those guidelines and we don't enforce them because they're hard to enforce, well then it is worthless. I think that to me is where it starts, is with the enforcement.
I've also had the comment that we should keep the same hours. Either that or switch the late night to July 3rd to 11 o'clock and not on the 4th, because the 5th, everybody works the next day. So they're trying to go to bed early and they have to get up the next day. And you're hearing fireworks go off until midnight. I mean, that's common I heard is, you know, flip the long hour onto the 3rd because everybody has the 4th off. So, just a comment.
I got a phone call with that same thing.
Yeah.
I noticed Hayward has no Roman candles. Is that the one that rattle the windows when they go off? I mean, there's some...
No, that's the one that's in a tube that you can, that like shoots out.
Looks like Wayne's done that before.
Maybe once or twice.
We'll talk to our expert on that here.
At
Yeah.
11 o'clock at night?
Maybe towards another person, which I wasn't supposed to do. They say explicitly on the package, but anyway.
You can plead the fifth.
That's right.
We'll have the police
Same
sit by
council.
your house next year, Wayne.
So, anyway. Anything else we need to discuss about fireworks? I think we've covered it fairly well.
And we'll wait and have Sam gather some more information before we proceed any further.
Yep. We move on then? Everybody's comfortable moving on to discussion about trees?
Yep.
All right. Let that discussion begin. Sam, I'll let you again bring us into it based on why it's on the agenda.
I led the last one. You want to take this one? I'll back you up.
Second the sidewalks.
I'll go ahead.
Two times now, Tom.
I'll go
You've
ahead
been
and
almost
start.
fired.
Second most controversial thing.
So I'll go ahead and start off if that's okay, and then I'll turn
Let
it over
Kurt
to
do it
Todd.
then.
You know, it is an economic development issue, I think. Right, so the agenda item, there's 5 attachments. The first is the current code, which dates back to 1998, and I don't think has changed very much. The second is the updated draft ordinance with the legislative updates that have occurred. So remember, a year ago, we approved an agreement with Simmery and Corey, also known as Iowa Codification, to update our code. That is still underway, and I hope to have a set of codes to start reviewing this year after the recent legislative updates from this current session, or that just finished, are included. But they sent me the draft that they have finished already on this. The third attachment is a simple ban. Where did I get that from? Was that Harlan?
Yes.
Yep. On tree planting in the right-of-way that could be substituted for the section in the second attachment. It's simple, yet it's complex at the same time because an outright ban has no exceptions to it. And then the fourth is a sample ordinance that has a number of parts and pieces that could be added into the drafts. And then the last is the grant-funded tree survey from 2020. In the aftermath of the recent storm, we've had multiple requests to remove trees. And Todd and I did a ride around last week, and there's a half a block where we could spend $12,000 on removing trees. 4 of them right in a row.
Not ash trees either.
No, big maples.
Soft maple.
And so it's, I listed some options here. You could prohibit further planting of trees in the rights of way between the sidewalk and street while the issue is sorted out. The best way to do something like that would be, I think, by ordinance, because an ordinance can be repealed later. It's hard to enforce something by resolution. The ordinance could also include the ability to allow right-of-way trees on a case-by-case basis by a resolution of the city council. So you could have an ordinance with an exception in it. And Todd and I have talked that over. We think that might work. So that'd be something to consider. Another option would be to prohibit further plantings of trees in parts of town where there aren't many now, such as east of the cemetery, or where the rights of way are narrower.
So if we were to talk about specific trees and that sort of thing, are we going to have a in-house arborist to try and determine what tree would work here or there, or how would you envision doing that on a case-by-case basis?
Well, we did that sort of a few years ago when we brought in the JEO Consulting, and they did a great study, which has been helpful. It wasn't just a study for a shelf. There's a number of trees that have been removed. We've been following the advice of that study, so it was positive. You know, our biggest challenge is that this goes all the way back to elm disease of the 70s. So all these elm trees were lost, and well, let's pick your most resilient tree, which is the ash, and plant 1 million of them, and now the ash trees are all dying. So the worst thing we could do is just plant all lindens, because then there'll be something that will come along and take those out in another generation. So in the urban tree study, there are other options of types of trees that could be planted as replacements. What you would have to decide is whether you want to have tree-lined streets or not, and if you do, as we take out more and more trees, are we going to allow people to put them back in, or do we put them back in ourselves? The way things are set up now, people can put them back in themselves isn't a problem for a while unless they plant it right on top of a water or sewer line, but it will be a problem in 10 years for trimming, and in 20 years when it starts dropping, bigger branches.
Or if you need access to the utility that's
Right.
underneath it.
You park them there, then in 2 years, then you have your sidewalks lifting, which is hazardous for walking. I don't really know any way to say it other than, I think it's dumb to plant a big tree that close to the sidewalk and stuff, because I've walked down many a sidewalk and there's lumps, yeah. And as the older you get, the more you think about that.
And the challenge is, nobody plants a big tree next to a sidewalk. It's always a small tree.
It's always a small one,
And,
yeah.
and using myself as an example, the original owners of my house planted a hedge right next to the sidewalk, which I try to keep it trimmed, but it's still an issue. The current codes say if you plant a hedge or a tree, it needs to be at least 2.5 feet back from a sidewalk. And so these are in older parts of town, that's a common problem, but everybody admires and likes the big old trees in the heart of the city, so.
I guess I would add too that, sometimes you think about, okay, well, let's just not allow big trees in. We're all gonna put in all little decoratives. That's not always the answer either. By code, you're supposed to be trimmed up 15 feet above the sidewalk. Some decoratives don't get that high. The other thing the decoratives do is grow out in a nice little ball right in front of stop signs, other traffic control devices. So, or they outgrow their projected height and they're still in the power lines or the cable lines or whatever. So they're maybe less costly than the big maples and ashes, but they still create issues.
I didn't ask you this before the meeting, but are you able to guess how much we spend every year on proactive tree trimming, like not the onesie twosies, but when we go down all the streets and?
Yeah, so I don't necessarily do that every year, but last year we did it. I sent out a crew of 4 guys for 3 weeks doing nothing but trim. Just to get it so there wasn't any trucks and whatever.
And that was days or weeks, or, you sent 4 guys out, but for how long?
For 3 weeks
For 3
straight.
weeks, okay.
So that's only trees in the right of way?
That is correct.
Okay. So it's kind of a liability issue in my mind yet, is who's liable for things that are in the right of way of the property, in front of my property? Who's liable? Because right now I think the city seems to be liable, but I'm not sure if that's really the case. Seems to me if I put something out on the right of way and it's my property, even though you have the right of way access to do what we need to do with that little piece of property, I don't think it necessarily is the city's responsibility to own that tree because I put it out there.
If it is dead, dying, or diseased, it is per the ordinance. And that gets, somebody mentioned earlier, is an arborist gonna go around. I guess if you look at Samurai, we're the resident arborist, right? So we're trying to make those determinations. And dying, you go take a good look around town. Tell me how many trees you can say are, what's your definition of dying is, because there's dead branches and trees all over town.
Yeah.
It's not as simple as there's a few leaves around. Sam and I argued about a tree the other day. I shouldn't say argued, that'd be a strong word. Discussed a tree the other day on whether or not it should be removed. We have differing opinions. He's the boss, so he won, but.
Well, there's a tree, if I might, there's a tree down here across from St. Pat's School that's flat. Have you guys seen that? It's just the branches.
On
Yeah,
Third
I
Avenue.
think it's because they've trimmed around the power line.
And
Yeah.
it looks terrible.
It does.
And it is, but it's healthy, and I think the idea was brought up to take it down, and I was told that that wouldn't go over very well, so I didn't press that issue, but you have that too, with the issue of trimming of trees over time.
Well, and I think about
Power
that
line.
tree that's on the corner, that was on the corner of Washington and East 4th. That was that big,
Oh, East 6.
East 6th, excuse me, yes. Did that one look like it was dying?
No, and if you read through the report that Sam mentioned earlier, that tree was not listed as one of the trees in our right-of-ways that was in poor condition,
All right.
but it went down.
Yep.
That was on the inside. That was on the,
It is, but I'm not sure where if the sidewalk is actually on the right-of-way line there or not. You gotta remember, we have varying right-of-ways around town, so in the center of town, most of our right-of-ways are 70-foot width. And then we went through a phase of 66-foot widths, and now all of our new additions are 60-foot widths. So depending upon where sidewalks are located, it's a good
Correct.
general rule, but it's not always the answer.
And we keep talking about trees as a liability, and in this case, they are. The windstorm, the ash borer brings it to the forefront of our discussion. But there are also a lot of benefits from trees. You mentioned tree-lined streets. I mean, that's a common for any community to talk about tree-lined streets. That's a positive thing when they're talking about it. And so, just to say trees are a liability, we're going to get rid of them, in the right of way, because it's going to cost us. I'm not ready to make that decision yet either. I look down 9th Street and I think about it when I remember in high school when those trees were all coming down, and 9th Street looked way different than when I was a little kid. I was in high school back then, and I looked, in this discussion in preparation for this, looking at 9th Street now, that's a beautiful street when you look down and you see that canopy of trees on the street. In my mind, now others may not see it that way, but
So
we
it's
put
essentially
trees-
putting a price on that beauty,
yeah.
right? That aesthetic.
Mhm. Right. When we did the downtown renovation, trees were a part of that renovation because of what they added to the look. And it was a hot button topic for a time. Some didn't want them, some did. And we did, and we kind of met in the middle, and we didn't have as many as were originally proposed, but we added trees because of what it added to the look of the downtown. So I don't want to just be all anti-tree. I'm speaking up, I'm not a tree hugger. Don't label me as a tree hugger in the paper. But
Maybe a tree trimmer, right? A tree trimmer, maybe?
I'm a tree buddy.
every quote.
Say that again.
I can watch the video over.
I can give you a price tag, or I mean, it's a shoot from the hip price tag on what the emerald ash borer is gonna cost us if you want me to. $1 million. There are 672 ash trees in the right-of-way in city parks. If it costs us $1,500 to remove each one of those trees, that is $1 million. And before the emerald ash borer, there was a Dutch elm. All right, so this community's went through it once already, we're gonna go through it again. And we pick a new breed of tree, the next thing's coming. I just want to make sure everybody understands that. There's your price tag, it's $1 million. And that's not including trees outside of the right-of-way. That's not including, my neighbor has 5 ash trees in their backyard. They're all going to die. That's not going to cost the city any money. It's going to cost those homeowners. I also don't like the fact, and this is what I've said before, I don't like the fact that Todd Jewell can go plant a tree in the right-of-way legally, and then someday down the road, everybody else in the community can pay to remove it.
That's my point.
That's wrong.
If I might? Yes. So I'd like to make a suggestion to move the process forward. So in order to change the ordinance, you need to have 3 readings. You could waive a reading or 2, but you need to have 3 readings. We don't have something in front of us for consideration. We're just talking about it. My suggestion to move the discussion forward would be to bring forward there's two ordinances attached. There's the one from Harlan, that very simple one with the one sentence in there, and then the draft from Iowa codification. We combine the two and put in there that on a case-by-case basis, the city council can approve trees in the right-of-way. Now, we could get a basket full of requests. We're not aware of very many trees that have been planted in the right-of-way in the last few years. It's been a few, not very many.
The newer additions, it's a handful.
Right. So that might be a way to manage the issue, or you could say that Public Works and City Manager will document the reasons for granting it and make sure there's a one call so it's not near any utilities, and then, you know, it becomes a public record that we can present. That way we're not, you know, micromanaging it, so to speak. You could do it that way too.
Yeah, you could. There are a few other things on our side. Now, wouldn't be my recommendation to do nothing, but there are, some of the things that are on our side is our current ordinance would not allow for a lot of trees. For instance, we mentioned the Washington Avenue 6th Street tree. Because of site triangle, that tree would not be allowed to be replaced. I believe the ordinance says you got to be 10 foot off the driveway. There's a lot of trees in the center of town that are closer than 10 feet to the driveway, so that would, you know, help. I think there's a provision on a fire hydrant at a distance away, but that only works if somebody's managing the process. And if we lose 672 trees, we're going to have to keep our eyes open as to what's going on.
So as an example, Todd, we're looking at a pending project on the old Bethel site. And trees will be a part of that project, I'm assuming. Are we going to have any, do we have any oversight on what those trees and those locations would be, or is that totally open to the developer?
Within the property lines, it'd be totally open to the developer. On the left, there was a site triangle issue on one of the intersections. But within the right-of-way, as long as it's a maximum, or a minimum of 81 square feet, and there's 9 foot of grass area, other than they can't go plant cottonwoods, right? There's a few walnuts, and so there's a few restrictions. Otherwise, no. Limited restrictions.
I'm going to ask, is there any options from the insurance industry that could help us with portions of the issue that we're talking about?
Cash for.
No, I'm thinking more about storm damage on property right-of-ways. You know, if we have a building damage, we have insurance for that. Is there insurance available? Kind of like the insurance that I could buy for if I have a plug in my drain and they have to come in and dig up my yard. And Sam, you know what I'm talking about, right? Is there a rider to that deals with trees in my right-of-way that I can add to that? I'm just asking. You can get insurance for about anything anymore, and I was just wondering if there's anything available for that. No, I'm kind of throwing the question out generally. I don't mean to just target you on it, Todd, but I'm thinking that if that is an option, that's something that we would want to know before we get into ordinance change, you know, about whether or not that's an option.
I think that there's plenty of ways that we can improve or maintain the aesthetic that we have without having trees within the right-of-way. I think it's too much of a liability, and it's too much stuff for the city to have to manage for the aesthetic.
We just did get done picking up the storm damage. Yay for that.
On that note, I want to thank the city employees for all that hard
Amen.
work. There was a lot of trees they hauled out.
Keep thinking that, these are once in a lifetime storms that rolled through, and seems like our lifetimes are getting longer and longer, that these storms that are coming through are becoming more and more prevalent. So I feel like that the action that we're taking right now is at least going to help set the tone for future generations of the citizens of Sheldon as far as what they're going to have to endure and deal with, and maybe mitigate some of that damage. Thankfully, no one got hurt, but the size of those trees and how quickly they fell, that easily could have been a different story.
Sam has thrown out some options. I guess we need to give him some kind of direction on how we want to move forward from here. And I'm open to suggestions.
I like the idea of not planning in the right of way. The only thing going by case, I think that could get dicey down the road. I'm not gonna say what it could turn into. But that's just my thought.
Experience tells you what it'll turn into.
I think so.
I think we go to the same old thing, people. Common sense. If people would just think ahead, because they don't use common sense, then we have to step in and make restrictions, and I hate that, but...
If people had common sense, Iowa codification wouldn't have a job.
When you say common sense, how would that, what,
Well, that
how would
cute
that limit
tree,
it?
that cute little tree in that thing, they don't look 10, 12, 14, it looks cute right in that corner, but they don't think down the road. I mean, I try to think a little bit ahead on that. They put them in a place because it looks cute for the first 5 years or 10 years. It looks beautiful, but then it grows, and then well, you walk down the sidewalks. How many times do you have to duck your head for the limbs? They don't keep them up. They let them grow too. They don't trim them up. Just a lot of personal responsibility. Think about it.
Because your common sense is an arbitrary term, I guess, in my mind, because I planted trees in our property when we moved into that 15 years ago, and they are now throwing some wonderful shade on our house.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to Scott to find out what the restrictions were at the time. Scott Weenie was the city administrator at the time. And there was not really much for restrictions at that point, but I guess I look back and I would not want to give up those trees either at this point. Now,
I planted 2 of mine, but I thought
and I
about
keep
what
them
they would
trimmed
look
and,
like down the road.
But now, Greg, are you talking about trees in the right-of-way?
Yes, there are 2, we planted more than just the 2 in the right-of-way, but there are 2 linden trees planted in the right-of-way, yes.
Gotcha.
So do you feel that those are your trees then?
Yes. I take care of them. I pruned them up the other day on Saturday.
There again, you take care of them. There's the key. You take care of
Right.
them.
But when you're looking at something like this, 10, 20, 30 years from now, Greg's going to move on to maybe a different place to live. And who's to say that next person that comes in there is going to have that same sense of responsibility and pride in those trees that my good friend the Lorax here has.
Right. Can I ask, why did you put them there instead of your yard? I mean, is there a reason, I want trees in my yard. My wife wants trees, but what was your reasoning?
Because of where our house sits in relation to the street, it was, between the sidewalk to the house was
Okay,
limiting.
well, and that's bad too if you put it too close to your house.
Well, the
And,
other
and
thing-
in your scenario, you've got, evening sun, right? So you-
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so I totally understand why you would do that.
So, I mean, and again, it's back to, there are benefits, and we can't, we weigh costs, but we also have to look at the benefits.
I know.
You know, the whole thing Brad's alluding to, there are communities that do allow chickens, and people are saying you should have chickens because they provide eggs and
The
responsibility.
problem
So-
becomes the definition of common sense, okay? You can't pick stupid, all right?
It's the reason why you
And
didn't bring
my
it up.
opinion of what Mike's common sense might be different than
Exactly,
yours.
that was my point. is
Um,
like,
yeah.
think
I
I'm
can
using
show you,
common
I
sense,
can
but-
show you some lots around here that have probably 5 times the number of trees that should be there, okay? Now, that person happens to think that trees are wonderful and they want a whole bunch of them.
Right.
I might not agree with them. Somewhere between that, I wouldn't want to live in a town that has no trees, okay?
Amen.
Period.
I agree with that.
So somewhere, and I don't know if you can legislate this, we can try, but good luck.
Well, it's not saying that we can't have any trees, it's just not in the right of way.
Right away.
Put them on your side of the sidewalk and it's fine.
Yeah. Unless you're Greg and you don't have the room.
The other thing we could consider, okay, we don't want the trees in the right-of-way because they become our responsibility. Maybe we could legislate that away and say, if you plant a tree there, it's not our problem.
So Micah would have to comment on that, but I don't want to go way back, but there was an opinion from a previous city attorney that said if there was trees in the right-of-way that wanted to be removed, or the council wanted removed, or the homeowner wanted removed, we could do it and then assess them. I don't believe that's the opinion of our current city attorney.
Have I given that opinion before, Todd? Sometimes your memory's better than mine.
I guess the other thing that scares me is getting too complex, okay?
Yeah.
I know some of these are 20-page solutions. I don't want a 100-page thing here. And then we're gonna have to have a tree policeman, okay? I don't wanna go there.
You don't realize.
Yeah.
We get requests all the time, all of my tree removed. I want the tree removed in front of my house.
On the right of way, you mean?
But whose expense is that?
If it's determined to be dead, dying, or diseased in any manner, it's the city's. That's the way
Yeah.
that ordinance is written.
So I think we need to change that ordinance,
Yeah.
if we can. I know.
Is that possible legally?
Well, that's something we'd have to find out. You're not gonna
Does
answer
this-
that.
If only there was a
We
lawyer
could be
here that could
till
tell us.
midnight and we're not gonna answer that, okay?
Okay, I'm wondering, does this fall under the Steve Hulgren's expertise? I mean, he's got experience in other communities. Would he be someone we could consult with on something like this? It's somewhat related in terms of nuisance.
I don't,
Probably a stretch.
yeah, I think we have,
I mean, I would ask him, I mean, I don't know if he's got to have some kind of background in it, some crossed it in his career.
we'll see him next week, we can ask him.
Bring it up with Steve once, see what he has to say.
Well, my thought then, to conclude this discussion for now, is we explore the ability to transfer the responsibility to the adjacent landowner, which I didn't see in the boilerplate code, and I didn't see in the code with the options, that we can just transfer the full responsibility of taking down a dead tree to the adjacent landowner. We can check into that. And then
John, we could sit here till midnight, we're not gonna solve this.
Yeah.
Sam, I don't think the dead, dying, disease clause is even in the tree ordinance. I think it's in the right of way ordinance. It's in a different spot. I have to look at it.
I guess I'm hard pressed to sit here and
Look
say
at you
we're
doing lawyer
responsible
stuff.
for what somebody else planted.
You are, Pete. Currently are.
Well, I don't like that. I want to look at changing that.
That makes two of us.
Okay.
And I like the simple ordinance of Harlan's.
And so the guy bought the house and somebody had planted the tree there, are they gonna argue? What's that gonna do to us?
It goes to the landowner.
Okay?
When I moved here, I had an aunt that lived in Carroll, and she lived in Sheldon years ago, and she said, oh, I loved it in Sheldon. They had beautiful tree-lined streets. And okay, maybe that's not worth anything, but to her, it was the one thing she remembered about Sheldon that was gorgeous.
It was one of the things that attracted Carol and I to Sheldon 13 years ago, was that first impression. Neighborly, you know.
So somewhere, if we can find a palatable solution to responsibility, then
Well,
That's
we can
fine.
define whose liability it
again,
is, we
we're
can
going
work
to sit
from
here
there.
for 20
right?
hours.
Yeah.
so-
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sam, do you have some direction from all the conversation, which way to go?
I'll bring forward a couple options, do some more research.
okay.
Kip,
Any final comments?
make the motion to adjourn.
That's what I'm looking for.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Hager,
Aye.
Farahona,
Aye.
Hamel,
Aye.
Snyder,
All right.
and
Aye.
We are adjourned.
see, you guys, yeah, you made fun of me.